Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling, well, a huge subject. We're looking at the very architecture of modern ambition, corporate power, and, yeah, sometimes outright deception.
It's a big one. We've got sources covering everything from, Silicon Valley flameouts like Theranos and FTX,
Right.
all the way back to historical giants like Rockefeller, and even looking at what's happening right now with data monopolies in places like China.
And the thread connecting all of this?
Yeah.
It really seems to be power.
Yeah.
How it's won, how it's kept safe, protected.
And what happens when that ambition just gets, well, out of control? When it sort of outruns ethics and sometimes the law itself.
Exactly. We're trying to distill these patterns,
Yeah.
the ones that connect a 19th century oil baron to a 21st century crypto guy. So you can see the strategies behind massive wealth building. They don't seem to change that much.
That's the goal. It's like a masterclass in how today's big players succeed, where they draw the line, or maybe where they deliberately smudge it out.
And crucially, what it means for the rest of us, the systemic consequences. If you're looking for a map of modern economic power, this is where we dig in.
And maybe the biggest initial hook, the thing that really defines this moment, it's the shift in what power even is.
How so?
It's not just about owning land or oil anymore. The real currency now is data. And critically, how fast you can use it, how efficiently you can weaponize that data. That's the new battlefield.
Okay, let's jump right there then. The AI data arms race. You mentioned the premise driving innovation has kind of flipped.
It really has. For years, Silicon Valley's playbook was simple. Hire the smartest person, the genius, right? And they'll invent the future for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the sources we looked at highlight something different, especially when it comes to deep learning. The core idea now, there's no data, like more data.
More data beats smarter algorithm.
Often, yes. An algorithm built by a decent, solid engineering team, if they have access to absolutely massive amounts of good, clean data, that algorithm will increasingly outperform one built by a world-class, Nobel-level researcher who just has less data to work with.
Wait, hang on. So does that mean having a monopoly on the smartest AI minds is actually less important now than having a monopoly on the data itself?
That's the implication. It feels like a massive shift, doesn't it?
It really does. A fundamental change in where the competitive edge lies.
It's absolutely fundamental. Now, don't get me wrong. Big scientific breakthroughs are still needed. They're rare and valuable. But for the day-to-day disruption deep learning is causing across industries, it's the sheer volume and availability of data that's driving it.
Data as the new oil. We hear that phrase a lot.
And the sources make it pretty clear when you look globally, China has built this really significant structural advantage, not just in the amount of data, the quantity, but also the quality.
Okay, let's break that down. Quantity first. How much are we talking?
Staggering amounts. More internet users than the US and all of Europe combined. Just think about that raw volume feeding into their algorithms.
Wow. Okay, that's quantity. What about the quality advantage? You said that's what should worry Western tech.
Yeah, because look at how Silicon Valley giants get most of their data. It's heavily focused on online behavior, right? What you search for, videos you watch, things you like or share.
So basically what we do on our screen.
Exactly. Largely digital sphere stuff, screen time. But in China, the whole tech ecosystem grew up differently. It was rooted more in real-world efficiency and physical services from the get-go.
You mean apps like WeChat? The sources called it a digital Swiss Army knife?
Precisely. It started as maybe a messaging app, but it became this all-in-one platform. And that means Chinese companies are collecting data from the actual messy real world.
What kind of real-world data?
Think about it. They know what you bought physically, where you ate, how you got there if you got a makeover, all through one connected payment and service system. It's data about the physical content of daily life.
That sounds way more detailed than just knowing I searched for something online.
Exponentially more. Their algorithms have, as one source put it, more eyes into the content of our daily lives. If an algorithm sees you ordered, say, 2 specific beauty treatments this month via the app, and you took the same smart bike route to a particular clinic twice.
Okay, I see. That's way richer than me just Googling makeover ideas.
Exactly. And that quality edge is huge as AI starts moving into non-online industries, things like logistics, healthcare, manufacturing. China pioneered these online to offline services, turning cities almost cashless.
But this wasn't a smooth, planned rollout, was it? The sources paint a picture of chaos.
Oh, total chaos. They called it the wildest war of copycats the country had ever seen. A real entrepreneurial coliseum.
This is brutal.
It was. Most companies didn't make it. By 2013, in that online to offline space, you basically had three big players left standing. Meituan, Dianping, which was like a Yelp copycat, and Nuomi.
And Meituan, led by Wang Xing, was already valued at $3 billion back then.
Yeah, and Wang Jing had learned the ropes through years of first copying Western models, but then, and this is key, out-innovating and out-executing them in the Chinese market.
So it wasn't just copying forever. The competition itself forced real innovation.
Absolutely. That intense pressure led to these bursts of homegrown innovation. We're talking about things that really changed city life, like those intelligent bike-sharing systems. They created the world's biggest Internet of Things network practically overnight.
So the takeaway for listeners here is, it's not just about having a clever idea anymore.
It's about controlling the fuel for the idea. The essential feed for continuous innovation in the AI age is data. Owning that data stream, that's the real moat now.
Okay, so from that external competition, let's pivot now to the internal stuff. The secrecy, the deception that led to some really spectacular implosions recently. Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes come to mind immediately. The sources had some incredible details.
Theranos is almost the perfect, maybe tragic example of taking that Silicon Valley mantra, fake it till you make it, and pushing it way, way past the breaking point into criminal territory.
And the secrecy wasn't just about protecting, like, legitimate secrets, right?
Yeah.
It was about hiding the fact that the whole thing was smoke and mirrors.
Completely. The lengths they went to were just astonishing. Employees literally forbidden from putting Theranos on their LinkedIn profiles.
What? So what did they put?
Some generic thing like private biotechnology company, and they weren't shy about sending out lawsuits and cease and desist letters if anyone posted a job description that was even slightly too detailed.
That sounds incredibly controlling and paranoid.
Deeply paranoid. The internal culture sounds toxic. The COO, Sunny Balwani, he was reportedly monitoring employee emails, checking browser histories. He even banned Google Chrome company-wide.
Why Chrome?
Fear. Genuine fear that Google would use the browser to somehow spy on Theranos' R&D.
Wow.
And it extended to physical space, too. Employees were apparently discouraged from using the gem in their building complex.
Why?
To stop them mingling with people from other companies who rented space there. Just absolute control to maintain the illusion. Imagine the mental toll.
It must have been exhausting. And all this control was hiding. Well, fraud, wasn't it? The sources mentioned proficiency testing.
Yeah, that seems to be where the cracks really started to show internally. Proficiency testing is crucial for labs. It checks their accuracy. An employee found their practices amounted to, and this is a quote, a form of PT cheating.
Cheating on the tests meant to ensure accuracy.
Exactly. A clear violation of the state and federal requirements. And this eventually led to an anonymous complaint. All while Holmes was publicly denying they were even using their devices without FDA clearance.
Which contradicted what they were saying internal.
Flatly contradicted it, according to the sources. Just months before, they'd been saying the opposite internally.
Okay, so Theranos was about deep clinical secrecy, hiding a technical failure. What about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried? That felt different. More like a betrayal of trust.
A different flavor of deception, absolutely. But just as corrosive. Bankman-Fried's initial rise was meteoric, right? He was brilliant at these complex trading puzzles. FTX grew incredibly fast.
And the VCs poured money in. $2.3 billion for just 6% equity. That creates a powerful image.
An irresistible illusion of success and stability. But behind the scenes, the sources suggest the decision-making was, well, not exactly democratic.
How so?
There's this instance described where the leadership team discussed a huge money transfer. Sam actually asked for a vote.
Okay, sounds reasonable.
Except two key leaders voted no, or at least no, or a very low amount. But the source notes Sam was perfectly capable of asking for a vote and then ignoring the result.
So the vote was just theater.
It appears so. He apparently ignored the dissent later on that transfer and even tried to line up a massive loan for Elon Musk's Twitter deal, sort of against the spirit of those internal checks.
It suggests a complete lack of real governance, like an absolute monarchy. And what was the core suspected fraud? What did they think he actually did?
His own CFO, Constance, she was deeply skeptical of his public explanation that the whole crisis was just an accounting error.
She didn't buy it.
Not at all. She reportedly felt sure he had consciously decided to take customers' money and use it as his own. The suspicion was that his other company, Alameda, had a sudden, huge trading loss, and he basically dipped into FTX customer funds to plug the hole.
So not just a mistake, but an active grab of customer money.
That was the suspicion, a profound betrayal disguised as a bookkeeping slip-up.
And this pattern, leaders just ignoring constraints or input.
Yeah.
We see it elsewhere too, right? Like Adam Newman at WeWork.
Oh yeah, Neumann was notorious for it. The sources describe him as petulant, resisting any advice that might dilute his control. Advisors would push him on governance or maybe giving up some personal benefits tied to the IPO.
And he just
rush out of meetings. He didn't want to loosen his grip on the company. It got so bad, his advisors reached this point of total exasperation. They basically had to force him out because his refusal to accept normal corporate governance was threatening the entire IPO.
So Holmes, Bankman-Fried, Newman. It's this recurring theme of founder ego and control clashing hard with accountability.
Fundamentally incompatible, it seems. And connecting this back to the wider system,
Yeah.
how hard is it to actually prosecute some of this stuff, especially complex financial maneuvers like insider trading?
That's a huge issue. The sources point to something called the Newman decision. What was that about?
Right. The Newman decision was pivotal for white-collar crime prosecution. It overturned convictions of several traders who had received inside tips.
Why were they overturned?
The court basically said that for the recipient of the tip, the trader, to be guilty, they had to know that the original leaker received some kind of benefit for giving the tip. And crucially, that benefit had to be tangible, akin to money.
Wait, tangible, like cash. So if the leaker just got, I don't know, friendship points, or maybe better access for future deals, that doesn't count.
That's the loophole it created, essentially. If the benefit wasn't cold, hard cash, or something very obviously equivalent, it became incredibly difficult to prosecute the person who traded on the information.
So sophisticated schemes where the payment is subtle, like reputation, access, favors, they become much harder to nail down legally.
Precisely. It raised the bar significantly, creating a kind of blind spot in the law for dealing with high-level financial information swapping, where the benefits aren't just a bag of cash.
It's fascinating how these personality traits seem to echo across different eras and industries. Whether it's crypto, oil, tech, these titans often share this intense desire for control, fierce competitiveness, and maybe a willingness to bend the rules. Let's talk about the control freak CEO archetype.
Steve Jobs is probably the poster child for demanding absolute control, both operationally and ideologically.
There's that story about Arthur Levitt, right?
Yeah.
The former SEC chair.
Yeah, fascinating anecdote. Jobs apparently invited Levitt to join Apple's board, but then he read a speech Levitt gave advocating for strong, independent boards.
Uh-oh.
And Jobs promptly withdrew the invitation. His argument was basically, that stuff about independent oversight, it doesn't really apply to Apple's culture.
He thought Apple was special, exempt.
He believed his whole integrated model controlling the hardware, the software, the services, it only worked with him, Steve, at the absolute helm. Any independent oversight was seen as a threat to that singular vision. Total control trumped shared governance, in his view.
Okay, so that's Jobs. What about Jeff Bezos? Also known for control, but maybe a different style, more confrontational.
Definitely confrontational. Bezos famously believes that truth emerges when ideas clash, sometimes violently. He fosters this culture where perspectives are deliberately banged against each other. It's not about finding consensus, it's intellectual combat to get to what he sees as the best answer.
And it wasn't just smart in his own area, right? The sources mention his grasp of logistics.
Yeah, there's this story about him at a distribution center meeting. He's relatively new to the nitty-gritty of logistics, but he starts laying out arguments on a whiteboard. And the experts in the room, they struggled to push back because, reportedly, every stinking thing he put down was correct and true.
That's intimidating.
It's a terrifying mix, isn't it? Immense willpower combined with this sharp intelligence that lets him dive into unfamiliar territory and just dominate the discussion and dictate the outcome.
Okay, so control is one thing. What about just pure competitive drive and willingness to take huge risks? Elon Musk seems relevant here.
Musk and SpaceX are a prime example. Remember those early launch failures? 3 in a row!
Yeah, things look dire.
So he finally brings in stricter quality control processes, much needed. But then they face this insane time crunch. They need to launch in 5 days, but the new rules require 5 weeks of checks.
What did he do?
He tossed the new rules out the window, told the team, go as fast as you can. It showed them he could pivot instantly and, crucially, that his appetite for risk was just way beyond what most people could stomach. That tolerance for a potentially catastrophic failure is often what sets these figures apart.
And taking risks often means clashing with established players, right? Like Richard Branson versus British Airways.
Classic example. Virgin Atlantic wanted landing slots at Tokyo's Narita Airport. British Airways saw those slots as their rightful inheritance, basically.
Their turf.
Exactly. So BA launched this fierce lobbying campaign against Virgin getting the slots. It actually backfired on them in the end, but it just shows the raw aggression incumbents will use to defend their position.
This kind of controlled aggression, it goes way back, doesn't it? John D. Rockefeller.
Rockefeller is fascinating, immensely successful, but also self-aware. The sources note he knew he had an ugly temper when too far provoked, and actively worked to control it.
So he wasn't just driven by emotion.
No, he made a very conscious strategic choice. Never let ego or anger guide his business decisions. Instead, he channeled that intensity into cold, calculated ruthlessness. Like his obsession with cutting out middlemen in marketing, making sure every possible cent flowed back to Standard Oil. His ruthlessness was strategic, not impulsive, which made him incredibly effective.
We also see figures who understood the power of public image, of crafting a persona. You mentioned Robert Maxwell earlier in a different context.
Maxwell is a really interesting case of using a public persona. When he took over Simpkins, his first press statement was all optimism, ambition, and promises. He pledged all my energies to building goodwill, getting respectability, getting a seat at the table with the powerful. The Bookseller magazine even called him the man of the hour.
So he knew how to play the game, project an image?
Absolutely. And he was commercially ruthless, too. That whole deal where he bought Pergamon Press back from Steinberg. Steinberg had paid $9 million for it. Maxwell maneuvered to buy it back for just over £600,000. Forced Steinberg to sell his shares for pennies on the pound 12p a share when Maxwell's own team had valued them near £2 just a few years prior.
Wow. Cynical, but effective.
Extremely. It demonstrates that brutal commercial skill alongside the image cultivation. He used that momentum to go after bigger targets, like inquiring about buying the Daily Mirror soon after. The persona and the ruthless deals went hand in hand.
And then there's maybe the ultimate image craftsman, Henry Ford.
Ford was a master. He deliberately cultivated this image of being a plain-spoken, almost folksy guy. A rube, as the sources put it. Too busy building things to read books.
That famous quote about books mussing up his mind.
Exactly. They muss up my mind. And you'd think that would hurt his image among, the educated classes.
But it didn't.
Quite the opposite. It was brilliant PR. The sources say common people loved his lack of pretension. It made him more of an American folk hero. His ads constantly hammered this theme. He was building a car for the people, turning it from a rich person's toy into something accessible.
So across the board, Jobs' control, Ford's simplicity, Maxwell's ambition, it's all about calculated strategy. Controlling the narrative, the product, the market, often with a level of ruthlessness most people just don't have.
It seems to be a core ingredient, yes.
So this concentration of power and, let's face it, extreme personality, it doesn't just create individual billionaires, it actually shapes the whole economic and political system, right?
Yeah.
You used to talk about the systemic side, the inequality.
Absolutely. When you have wealth concentrated on such a massive scale, the sources are pretty clear that money almost always gets used to influence policy.
Yep.
To secure policies beneficial to their interests, as one source puts it. Often those policies come at the expense of people who are less well off. This feeds into political polarization, particularly on the right, where you often find wealthy donors strongly opposing things like taxes and regulations, the very things that might limit further wealth accumulation. It's the mechanism of plutocracy.
And this connects to the idea of the winner-take-all economy. It's not just about inheriting old money anymore.
That's a really interesting finding in the data. If you look at the absolute top tier, the top 0.01% people earning over $10 million a year back in 2005, a majority of their income actually came from salaries and business income, not just clipping coupons from inherited stocks.
So high-paid labor, essentially.
Yeah.
CEOs, top traders, successful founders.
Exactly. 64% of their wealth, including capital gains, came from those sources in 2005. That's a much higher share than it was back in 1979. It reflects how the rewards for being at the very top of certain professions have exploded, creating wealth through labor, albeit extremely highly compensated labor, rather than just passive returns on old capital.
But to understand the really long-term picture, we need to look at capital itself, right? Thomas Piketty's work on historical returns.
Piketty's findings are fundamental here. He looked at centuries of data and found this persistent pattern. The pure return on capital, what he calls $3, has historically hovered around 4 to 5% per year, sometimes dipping to 3%, sometimes briefly hitting 6%, but generally in that range.
Okay, 4 or 5%. How does that compare to overall economic growth?
That's the crucial point. That rate of return, $3, has almost always been higher than the rate of overall economic growth, $3.
So $3, what does that actually mean for inequality?
It means if you already have capital wealth, your wealth is likely growing faster on its own than the economy as a whole is growing, faster than wages are likely rising for the average person who relies on labor income.
So wealth begets more wealth faster than work creates wealth.
That's the inherent dynamic. Rojidal is the engine that drives long-term wealth concentration. Unless something disrupts it, capital tends to accumulate and become more dominant relative to income earned from work.
And the only time that really changed was
After the massive shocks of the world wars, the destruction of capital and subsequent policy changes temporarily suppressed that return, pushing it maybe above 6% briefly as things recovered, but eventually it settled back down towards that historical 4 or 5% level while growth remained lower.
So that's the long, slow grind of accumulation.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned crises create opportunities.
Big time. That's the whole idea behind distressed investing. When markets panic, asset prices collapse. Firms like Blackstone saw the aftermath of the dot-com crash in 2002 not as a disaster, but as the opportunity of a decade to buy assets cheaply.
Buying when there's blood in the streets.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Having capital ready to deploy when everyone else is forced to sell or is paralyzed by fear is a classic way to generate massive returns. Crises reshuffled the deck, but usually in favor of those holding cash.
Which brings us to 2008, the financial crisis. The moment when the government had to step in because letting things collapse wasn't an option. The too big to fail moment.
Right, and the political reaction was fierce. You had Democratic leaders, according to the sources, basically saying years of deregulation had let the financial sector hold the public hostage, that taxpayers were being forced to pay ransom, like it or not.
A real sense of outrage and helplessness.
Absolutely. But interestingly, inside some financial firms, the view was different, more Darwinian. An executive at Morgan Stanley was quoted saying something like, "Weak people are being taken out. Strong people are going to do very, very well."
A brutal perspective.
But even that Darwinism had its limits. The Lehman Brothers failure was the breaking point, when J.P. Morgan had to make that call demanding collateral because Lehman was suddenly massively exposed.
The dominoes started to look like they could really fall.
Exactly. The threat became systemic, immediate. It wasn't just about letting one weak firm fail anymore. It was about potentially bringing down the entire global financial system. That was the razor's edge they were walking.
Given this tendency towards concentration and the risks of crisis, what do the sources suggest as ways to maybe mitigate this without causing chaos?
Well, history offers one tool that worked before: progressive taxation.
Higher taxes on higher incomes and large inheritances.
Exactly. The sources argue that this approach played a big part in preventing wealth inequality from snapping right back to the extreme levels seen before World War I, the Belle Epoque. The suggestion is that reversing the trend of decreasing tax progressivity we've seen since the 1980s could make a real difference again.
So that's taxing income and inheritance. Is there anything aimed more directly at the Tortigio problem, the accumulation of capital itself?
Piketty's big proposal is exactly that: a progressive global tax on capital, on wealth itself, not just income.
A wealth tax. How would that work?
The idea is it would be a more direct, maybe less economically distorting way to counteract that inherent tendency for capital to outgrow the economy. It relies on market forces, but aims to reassert some democratic control over capitalism to ensure the benefits are shared more broadly in the name of the general interest. It's designed specifically to lean against that re-Gijor wind. #tag outro.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground today.
Right.
From the power of data in China's AI dominance.
Yeah, to the intense internal secrecy at Theranos, the betrayal at FTX.
And looking back at the personalities, that drive for control, the ruthlessness we see in figures like Jobs, Rockefeller, even Ford's crafted image.
And threading through it all is this persistent challenge of wealth concentration and how it shapes everything else.
Right. And you mentioned simple metrics like the Gini coefficient don't always capture the full picture because they blur the lines between wealth from work and wealth from capital.
Exactly. The sources really emphasize that the history of inequality isn't some neat economic formula. It's described as political and chaotic.
Political and chaotic. That definitely challenges the simple story of meritocracy, doesn't it?
It really does. It suggests struggle, strategy, influence, luck, not just pure economic desert.
Which leads us to a final thought to leave you, the listener, with. If this history of wealth and power is fundamentally more chaotic, more political, maybe more based on strategic ruthlessness than we like to admit, how do we as a society handle that?
Yeah, how do you balance the undeniable drive and innovation these figures often bring?
With the absolute need for systemic trust, for ethical rules of the game that keep the whole system fair and functional for everyone.
That balancing act, that feels like the central question, the ongoing challenge for our economic world today.